Since the advent of Islam, and because of its association of being the language of Muhammad, Allah, and the Quran, Muslims view Arabic as a sacred language and therefore superior to all other languages. Hence, in Islam, all worship and prayers are conducted in Arabic. Its status is elevated by the Quran in the following places, praising itself for being revealed in a clear Arabic tongue. The corollary from this is that for Muslims it is a holy, unique, unrivaled and divine language, even if the vast majority of the world's Muslims do not understand it. As a byproduct for the over-veneration of the Quranic language comes the exaggerated respect shown towards the Quran. In fact, such is the reverence for the language itself that regardless of its message, whether it be a word or an everyday mundane phrase, if written in Arabic, Muslims out of respect would not desecrate it. For example, link in the description of an article that reads, Bangladesh uses Arabic signs as cure to public urination. It describes how the reprehensible act of public urination is a major problem for the majority Muslim country. Most do not understand Arabic, but because they automatically assume that the writing itself is sacred, authorities use it to stop public urination. Taken from the article in the picture, the Arabic simply says, "It is prohibited to urinate here." But written in any other language it is ignored, yet because the sign is in Arabic, it stops them urinating at that place, assuming it is religious in nature. Despite the awe and auspicious position of Arabic within Islam and in the minds of Muslims, it has a very human origin, not a divine one. This is because Arabic's origins can be traced to a period of time within human history and to a geographical location like any other human language. So it is Allah who speaks the language of men, not men who speak the language of Allah. It is not, therefore, a language from the heavens of divine origins spoken by God as Islam claims it is, in which case Allah decided to take Arabic as a language from around 500 AD, and before that he spoke another language because Arabic did not exist. Dr. Samir Abu Absi, Professor of Languages at the University of Toledo, has uncovered archaeological records for the development of a hybrid primitive written Arabic dated to the 5th century AD. His research concluded that the Arabic script evolved from Nabataean, a direct descendant of Aramaic, which is itself the offspring of a Proto-Semitic alphabet. As will be seen shortly, the earliest inscriptions of what could be described as written Arabic script are dated between 512 to 568 AD, and even that included many Aramaic alphabets and words from which the Arabic later developed. According to Professor Irfan Shahid, a foremost expert says that the Namara inscription pictured here is usually interpreted as one of the earliest examples of the foundation of what later became the Arabic language. The inscription is a later version of the Nabataean language the language from which Arabic later developed. Even at the time of when the Quran was supposed to have been written in the 7th century, there was no standard Arabic writing formed, as at this time when Arabic was still at its infancy and was a mixture of late Nabataean, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Syriac languages. These languages are branches of each other and offshoots. These different mixes of languages were predominant as a written language and the lingua franca of the entire Arabian Peninsula before gradually being displaced by Arabic in the 7th century AD. As seen in a previous video, a well-established point was the notable trait of early written Arabic was that it lacked vowel signs and diacritical points and was thus prone to mispronunciation. It was archaic and unreadable. It was from around the 4th century AD where the Nabataean script starts to evolve into a recognizable Arabic script, although it is still not readable to today's Arabs. These early inscriptions were written in more than one script, a common feature of early Arabic writing. For example, an undotted 17-letter Arabic script dating to the 6th century AD has been found at 4 locations in Syria. One of the earliest is from Zabad, pictured here, found in a town near Aleppo, Syria. The Arabic inscription consists of a list of names carved on the lowest part of the lintel dedicated to Saint Sergius, the upper parts of which are occupied by inscriptions in Greek and Syriac. The 2 other Arabic inscriptions are from the southern region borders of Hauran. A 4th inscription called al-Jimal is written in both Arabic and Greek script and has been dated also to around the 6th century AD. In terms of script development from Nabataean to Arabic, here are some pictures taken from the Jordan Museum on how the Arabic language evolved textually. The museum's plaque clearly states that Arabic evolved from Nabataean. The oldest papyrus found in Arabic dates to 643 AD, found in Egypt, pictured here. It is not a piece of the Quran or sacred document as one would expect. Rather, it is a bilingual Arabic-Greek fragment consisting of a tax receipt. Even at this late date, over 10 years after Muhammad's death, the Arabic is a primitive form written using flex to produce the modern 28-letter Arabic alphabet. So what about the term Old Arabic? Emerging first from around the 1st century AD is a term defined by linguists as Old Arabic. However, despite its name, these are a group of very distinct languages and unintelligible from what is considered actual Arabic as it is known today. This is because it was a collection of related dialects that constitute the precursor of Arabic. Scholars named its variant dialects after the towns where the inscriptions were discovered. From these, the Safaitic and Hismaic are closest to Arabic due to the fact that they participate in the innovations common to all forms of Arabic. In order to illustrate how the term Arabic to describe some of the very early scripts can be misleading, as it really is not Arabic as it is understood today. For example, one of the first so-called Arabic scripts is called the Arabic Musnad, which developed from the aforementioned languages and was used until the 6th century AD. As evidenced in the picture, the reason why it is not Arabic in the conventional sense is because it does not have the cursive aesthetics that is associated with modern Arabic scripts. In fact, it resembles Nabataean and Canaanite alphabets more than the Arabic. Grammarian Al-Hamdani provided sketches of the Musnad alphabet in his book Al-Ifrin. confirming that modern Arabic inscriptions were derived from the letter shapes of the Musnad. Here the Arabic letters are highlighted in green by the author for clarity. Abul Faraj Muhammad ibn Ishaq, better known as Ibn al-Nadim, is another famous scholar and author of the Kitab al-Fihrist, said to be the greatest book in the Arabic language on the Arabic language. The Fihrist gives ample testimony to the knowledge of pre-Islamic Aramaic, Hebrew, Syriac, Greek, Sanskrit, Latin, and Persian influences upon the Arabic language, and then subsequently the Quran. He describes how Aramaic was increasingly influential to the Arabic language, something which modern scholarship corroborates. He explains how the Arabic alphabet, in its most primitive form, developed out of cursive variant of the Nabataean script only in the 5th century AD. This is important bearing in mind Muhammad was said to be born in 570 AD. Ibn al-Nadim also confirms the works of his predecessor Al-Hamdani that Arabic developed from the Musnad. Here is an example from his book. The Arabic letters of today are highlighted in green for clarity. Several other prominent Muslim scholars believed it too. These were Ibn Khaldun and Al-Qalqashandi. Ibn Washir is one of the few Muslim scholars who translated from the Nabataean language. In his book Kitab al-Falaha Nabataean, a major treatise on the subject, it contains valuable information on words, teachings, and doctrines taken from pre-Islamic sources that were incorporated into later Islamic sources. In his book Kitab Shawq al-Mustaham, he discusses how the Quran could not have been written around 650 AD as claimed by traditional Islamic sources, as the Arabic written language had not fully developed for nearly 200 years after. Even in his time, Syriac was the main language in use for scriptures, not Arabic. Arabic was being promoted at the time by the Abbasid Caliphate. The first form of an Arabic-like alphabet developed during around the time of Muhammad's birth, 570 AD, and this extended into early Islam. It was known as the Al-Jazm script, pictured here, and it was used by northern tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. Again, although it is called Arabic, it is still unreadable to anyone who understands Arabic today. Nonetheless, the roots of this script again goes back to the Nabataean script and is heavily influenced by Syriac and Persian scripts and their language. Islamic sources such as Lisan al-Arab credits a figure by the name of Atai with being the first to write in the Al-Jazm script, although other books such as Al-I'lam says that Aslam ibn Sidra changed the Musnad script to Al-Jazm script. Whatever the case may be, as can be seen by the picture of the Al-Jazm script, it shows that the common claim by Muslims that the Quran is written and recited in the original Arabic of Muhammad is not true, as the Arabic of the Quran, the Hadith, and other Islamic scriptures that are in possession today are different scripturally, verbally, and linguistically from the one Muhammad would have been familiar with in his time. As these scriptures in possession today are written in an Arabic form that is some 200 to 300 years later and back projected to Muhammad's time into an Arabic version that did not exist during Muhammad's time. Even modern academics also attest to this. For more research, consider the works of Sa'd abualhaqq, Roots of Modern Arabic Script from Musnad to Jazm. From his research, here is a comparison of letters that Arabic evolved from. Note that even early Arabic writing dated from 7th century AD is still difficult to identify when compared to today's Arabic. Following the Arabic Musnad and Al-Jazm, the Kufic script evolved as the next stage of Arabic. This occurred in the 7th century AD. Unlike the two older scripts mentioned, in the Kufic the letter shapes can be identified better as something that is called Arabic. So it is the Kufic script that is known as one of the oldest Arabic scripts, which persisted in common use until the 13th century AD. Its name refers to the city of Kufa in Iraq, where it first appeared. This is over 1,000 kilometers distance from both Mecca and Medina, the places where Muhammad would have lived, travelled, and been familiar with. Even then, in the early stages of its development, the Kufic script is difficult to read for even an Arab expert, as it did not include the distinguishing dots and diacritics that are known in modern Arabic scripts. These were added during the later development from the 8th century AD onwards. The Kufic script continued its development through the different caliphates. Here is an example of a Kufic script from the 9th to the 10th century AD. In terms of written Arabic, although it is true that there was a blooming pre-Islamic poetry culture, but that was mainly oral poetic tradition, and it was not properly recorded or written down until the 8th or the 9th century AD. Coincidentally, it is around this time that the Quranic manuscripts are also dated, and the earliest references from outside Islamic literary traditions to an Islamic book called the Quran occurs also in the mid-century AD. For example, between an Arab and a monk called Abraham of Beit Hil. So in conclusion, it is only since Islam began, not prior, that Arabic became a sacred language. As a consequence, its sacred books and worship came to be done in Arabic. Such is the sanctity held for the language and the reason why Muslims venerate the Quran to the extent that they do, even if they do not really understand it fully, that even normal everyday signs written in Arabic has the desired effect of stopping people breaching laws. Despite the holy position placed for Arabic as a divine language, it evolved within human history, that is to say, from a geographical point in time. So it is not a divine language, being the personal favorite lingua franca of the God of the universe called Allah. Aramaic was the precursor to the Nabataean language, which later evolved into what came to be known as Arabic around 500 AD. Arabic as a language has been heavily influenced by many other languages, primarily Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, Nabataean, and Persian. The Arabic at Muhammad's time was a heavy mixture of these other languages, and therefore very different to today's Arabic. In other words, the Arabic of Muhammad was different textually and linguistically from the Arabic that the Quran and other Islamic scriptures were subsequently written into later in the 8th century AD. This means the Quran in the hands of Muslims today is not written in the original language of Muhammad, something that is claimed by Muslims. Rather, it was written into an Arabic 200 to 300 years removed from the Arabic Muhammad would have spoken and been familiar with.